Can you imagine if 100 years ago, right, a writer writes a book that says human rights are a fiction, number one. Two, there's no meaning whatsoever to human life. Doesn't exist, right? I mean, to be clear, let me give you the exact quote. See if I can catch the exact quote, right? In other words, human subjectivity would not be missed, meaning love, human subjectivity, love, right? Love, commitment, loyalty, integrity, eros, poignancy, right? And all of that is essentially irrelevant. There's no meaning to it whatsoever. And if you think your love has any meaning at all, it's a delusion. You know, it sounds pretentious to say that anything's important. Does that make sense? You get what I mean about that sentence, my friends? In other words, we're in the old world, in the kind of much of the old world, we claimed importance for so much that wasn't important. And one of the kind of insidious influences of the wry skepticism that often becomes cynicism in late modernity and in postmodernity is that claiming anything is important itself is suspect, right? There's something wrong with you if you're claiming that something's important, right? It's some kind of inflation, and probably you should go back and do some early attachment work and figure out what the compensation is that you're doing. And we've lost a sense of our own importance. We've lost a sense of the importance. And importance is such a good word. I actually haven't done the etymology on it. We can do it afterwards. But importance means the gravitas. You all know the word gravitas, right? The gravitas means the gravity of. And the gravity means it's heavy, right? It has weight. There's a weightiness, right? I don't know, Elena, what the word is for that in Russian or Claire in French or Shahati in Dutch or whatever you guys, speak in that land that gave us the British West Indies Company, right? Or in Chinese, right? There's what are the words, right? Zach and I were looking at words in the last couple of weeks used by Chinese scholars, right, to convey this notion in part of gravitas. It's heavy and it matters, right? Gravitas stands against the sense of heaviness, but not heaviness in a bad way. Like, oh, it's like, that's real heavy. There's a tragedy to heaviness. It's real heavy, but the tragedy only comes from the fact that life matters. When we say kind of in English, that's a real heavy thing. And, in a kind of tragic way, it's only tragic because it matters. Does that make sense? Now, if it wasn't heavy in a good way, meaning if it didn't matter, well, then nothing would matter. But because it's heavy, because it has gravitas, then if it goes wrong, it matters. So in some sense, it's the heaviness in the good sense. Whoa, that's a heavy story, right? It's the heaviness. It's a persona, right? An idea with gravitas. It has weight, right? It stands against what Milan Kundera calls famously the unbearable lightness of being, right? There's a beautiful Hebrew word, which is kal, right? It would be in English K-A-L. It's a two-letter root, kal, kuf and alamed. And kal means lightness. There's a lightness to it. But in the sense of kal, in a sense of it, it's superficial. It refuses to go deep. It's lazy, right? In other words, that which prevents me from depth is usually laziness. And laziness doesn't mean you can work all day and be lazy. You can be a workaholic and be lazy. Lazy means, right. I'm not willing to challenge, right, the kind of givens that I've established that allow me to comfortably navigate my life. I'm in my comfort zone. I won't challenge that comfort zone. I become Pink Floyd, comfortably numb. So I never actually let go of the old structures. I never shatter the icons. I never become an iconoclast. I never become Abraham. I never set out in chapter 12 of the book of Exodus on the journey to the promised land, because I am trapped in my yesterdays. I'm trapped in my winning formulas that have allowed me to get through life, right? I'm trapped in my old scripts of desire that have allowed me to somehow navigate and cover the pain and the emptiness, right? So I need to actually be able to cut through that. I need to get to depth. I need to get to gravitas, right? And in gravitas, there's joy. There's joy. Right? So there's great joy in gravitas. I get to the depth of things, and it's important. So this is all just a way of just kind of just saying hello. I just want to say hello, like hello. I'm so happy to be with you. I'm so happy, and I'm so honored to be with you. And I just want to, if you'll allow me to, right? I'm jet lagged. I flew kind of late and didn't quite fall asleep last night because whatever. Jet lag seems to kind of, as you get a little older, jet lag is kind of more significant, right? So I want to just tenderly say, what we're doing here is important. It really matters. It matters ultimately. It has ultimate significance. I think it has ultimate significance. It would have ultimate significance, even if we failed, right? If we were tilting a windmill, Don Quixote, and we failed, we were unable to accomplish the goal of one mountain. We were not able to change the source code. We were not able to evolve the source code of consciousness and culture. We were not able to articulate the new story and make it part of the fabric of the next stage of humanity. We were not able to birth the new human and the new humanity. We were not able, as my beloved wholemate, Barbara Marx Hubbard, would talk about all the time, we weren't able to become personal expressions of conscious evolution. And therefore cause, right, an evolutionary shift, right, and up-leveling, which would actually respond to the meta crisis and enable us to create not just a better tomorrow, but a tomorrow, right? A tomorrow that actually there are human beings in that are actually being human in the best and most beautiful and most subtle and most profound sense of the word. And even if we failed at all of that, the attempt would be unbearably significant and filled with joy and celebratory. Right? You feel that with me? Right? We're celebrating even as we're ecstatically trembling. And we would make the attempt with full power, with everything. But I think we actually can succeed. I think we actually have a really good shot at this. And what are we trying to do? And I want to just, we're at the beginning of this year. Right? We're in episode 400 and something. Right? We're deep in, right? Tragically, in many ways, all of the things that we were talking about in 2017, 18, when we started, which people said were ridiculous, right? When I was trying to describe and map existential risk, are now becoming more and more available. What are we doing here? And there's an essay we call Love or Die. And Elena, thank you for your beautiful work on it. Right? Love or Die, which we can put in the chat box. Don't look at it now, but maybe we'll send it to everyone. It should actually go in every week's mailing to everyone, and it should be kind of constantly available, which is kind of the context and the framework for One Mountain. The framework for One Mountain, just in a word, is love or die. That's the framework. In other words, either we, but love or die, it's not a placebo. It's not a kind of platitude, right? It's not a kind of pretty costume. It's the realization that either we participate in the evolution of love and tell a new story of value and up-level what it means to be a human being, or we will quite literally die. We will experience what we call here the second shock of existence. The first shock of existence is the realization of the death of the individual human being at the dawn of prehistory. And the second shock of existence is the realization of the potential death of humanity. And as Christina Amelon said correctly in her Dharma recapitulation, there are actually two possibilities. There's a genuine possibility that the exponential technologies that we are unleashing in the structure of a global civilization, in a world in which all civilizations that existed in the prior world, as Joseph Tainter points out in his book about this topic. All prior civilizations fell. We haven't solved any of the core dynamics that caused all prior civilizations to fall. Now we're in a global civilization. We haven't solved any of the prior issues. We have exponential weaponized technologies, which are proliferating at an unimaginable rate. Those technologies are accessed by rogue non-state actors on a regular basis. But there was, 20 years ago, access to, let's say, 500 people. Today, there's access to 10,000, right? To kind of exponentialized payload nuclear technologies of various forms, right? But more than that, that's just kind of vector one. There's this emergence of technologies that we actually don't know what they do and how they operate, right? Which are creating an immersive environment in which people literally are living, and an entire generation is growing up in that immersive environment. And once we get to, and there's an enormous amount of information suggesting we will get there, once we get to artificial general intelligence, if artificial general intelligence is owned by a superpower, let's say China, for example, China is then able to impose a values lock-in on the world, because artificial general intelligence will actually have them win the arms race and win the economics race and win, right, all the different vectors of the power race within a period of probably 18 months. So we're kind of developing. So there's this race in artificial intelligence. And then, of course, there's an entire set of issues of dead zones in the ocean, right? The extraction model that extracts from planet Earth that which took billions of years to create, right? There's the rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics, which is our dominant story in the world, which creates in its wake fragile systems or complicated systems that are optimized for short-term profit, for efficiency, and not in any sense for resilience and life, right? All of these together and much more that shouldn't actually be talked about in public, right, are part of the kind of 13 or 14 vectors of existential risk. And I don't say this lightly. One of our sister organizations, right, that we're very close to, that we operate kind of, in tandem with, they're working on one dimension of the issue, working on another. They're working right now on collating all of the risk reports in the world and integrating them. So we're doing this kind of, we're looking at this seriously. This is serious. There actually is now, how do we solve it? So there's actually an imperative. The imperative is love or die, but love or die means, what do we mean by that? We mean that we can respond to this meta crisis either by trying to fix the infrastructure, which is a good idea. And everyone knows what my next sentence is. The example I always give is, the capacity to find bioweapons in the wastewater. That's one of, 20 examples I could give, right? Infrastructure fixes, right? There are potential social structure fixes, which would be, for example, let's figure out how to regulate and bind, right, new technologies, right, that are potentially weaponized. How do we stop gain of function research, which actually generates new viruses that are not in environments that are in any way controllable, which could easily cause a pandemic that would literally make COVID look like child's play. These things are all in play now. And there are people close to us, working on this, adjacent to us, who are fantastic. And it's a wild and sacred battle that's happening in many vectors behind the scenes. And when a victory is won, you don't even hear about it. And a couple of victories have been won, but there's many, 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 many more to go. But those are social structure and infrastructure. And basically, those are critically important. What we've said here, though, is that those are insufficient. And we go to Harris, who's the sociologist who coined these terms, to his third term, superstructure. And superstructure means a lot of things, but the way I'm interpreting it is it's a new story of value. It's the realization that only a new story of value, a new actual vision of what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a human being, actually changes the vector of history. But that actually the only way history actually ultimately changes is when a new story generates new interior technologies, new ways of being. When our current ways of being are about to obsolete us and destroy us, we need literally new ways of being. We need a new story of value from which to generate reality. We need new structures of consciousness. We need quite literally to evolve the source code of culture and consciousness. And you might think that's ridiculous and absurd, but actually it happens. It happens at key junctures in history, which is why we often invoke the Renaissance, right? In which we had an entire Europe and part of Asia which actually understood. When I say actually understood, about 1,000 people understood. Everyone else was doing business as usual. There were about 1,000 people who understood at this leading edge of history that actually the old world was dying and falling apart, that the suffering was unimaginable. The Black Death swept through Europe, causing a level of suffering that's virtually indescribable. And the descriptions are ample and available. You should look them up. And this small group of people, led by Marcello Ficino, in the Florentine Platonic Academy, funded by Cosimo de' Medici, they actually understood, wow, this is a time between worlds. It's a time between stories. We're going to tell a new story of value. That's what we're going to do. We're going to tell a new story. They didn't call it a story of value. That's basically what they're going to tell, a new story. They focused on the new story. They're going to tell a new story of what it means to be a human being, what it needs to be a woman, what it needs to be a man, what sexuality means, what human rights mean, right? They actually didn't tell the story of what value means, how we gather information more accurately, how we gather information, right? What the relationship is between the infinite and the finite, right? What we think of God or don't think of God, how we experiment, right? The scientific method, third person perspective. Right? This entire world emerged, and that entire world was a new story, and that new story generated modernity, right? And as I've said many times, citing Habermas, it generated all of the dignities of modernity. But now let me add to Habermas. Habermas also points out that modernity has disasters, but he's unwilling to trace them to their root, right? It actually generated this originating story in the Renaissance to the extent that it got the plot lines of reality right. It generated the dignities of modernity. And we gathered information in a new way, and we abolished slavery, and a sense of universal human rights, right, entered the field, and a possibility of social mobility and education and an explosion of life. We were able to literally create more sustenance, and literally life exploded. We're going at 8 billion people. There were a couple hundred years ago, 500 million. Right? It's just literally an explosion of life and of unique selves and of love, right? And of creativity and of human minds and imaginations and stories. It's an incredible explosion. And at the same time, if you just simply do the math, there's more suffering than there ever was. There's more people, right? 8 billion people. The percentage of people suffering intensely now is X, right? X is, tenfold, right? Literally tenfold what it was 200 years ago, right? If there were 500 million people 200 years ago, and X percent were suffering intensely, so it was number X. If today there's close to 8 billion people, let's say 20% are suffering intensely. It's a fair number for lots of reasons. So we've now exponentially increased suffering, right? And so that's a big conversation, right? There's a myth of progress, right? There is progress in certain key dimensions, and Steven Pinker has spent his career in part pointing them out, and they're partially true. But the progress narrative is in many ways a myth. Right? The suffering is actually intense across the planet. We need to hold the real areas in which there's been progress. And from the larger perspective, we've actually come to the brink of the abyss. Because we actually have the capacity to destroy ourselves or to destroy our humanity, a capacity that never existed before. And the mental anguish on the planet, right, is unimaginable today. Even as the opportunity and the plenitude for part of the planet is unimaginable, right? So we're in this gap between have and have-nots, which is also unimaginable. It's one of the vectors of existential risk. So all of this comes together. And what do we need to do here? We need to make the Da Vinci move. That's what we're here to do. We're here to make the Da Vinci move is, right, let's tell a new story, but not make one up, not a fanciful story, not a conjecture. Let's actually gather the leading edge insights of pre-modern, modern, and postmodern thinking, weave them together, the validated insights of all the leading streams of wisdom of pre-modern, modern, and postmodern thinking, gather them together, weave them together in a larger story of value, download them into our very bodies, because we're the storytellers and we are the story. We realize the story is unfinished. We're the storytellers. We are the story. We download them into our bodies, and we begin to become something new. We begin to become conscious evolution. Evolution, right, becomes conscious evolution, becomes awake and alive in person in us. We begin to become not merely Homo sapien, but Homo Amore. We become the universe a love story in person, because the realization that the universe is a love story is part of the new story of value, but it's not an assertion we make. We actually do the science deeply. We do the chemistry. Molecular chemistry is critical, right, for that notion of universal love story. We do the science deeply, and we tell the story, and we tell it in a way that every human being on the face of the planet can access it, right, whatever their entry is of their level of consciousness. And that story has got to include Taoism in a deep way. It's got to include the depths of Russian literature. And it's got to include, it can't be a San Francisco story, right? It's got to include the depths of Europe and Asia, and Africa has got to be in there, but not in this kind of superficial pluralistic way, but actually weaving together the depth structures of validated human wisdom, gnosis, right? The gnosis, the erotic knowledge of the nature of reality. We have direct access to the interiors of reality, and we're able to, through the interior sciences in every tradition, and weave them with the exterior sciences and create this larger whole, this larger business, this larger story. That's what we can do at this moment in time. Now, that is daunting, but it's doable. And it's doable if we step up and we say, I'm going to play. I'm going to play. I want to just invite everyone in this insane way to step up and to join. And Suzette's going to be creating a structure for people to kind of participate in legacy. She's been working on it for a couple of years to kind of participate in resourcing, participate with your time, participate with your prayer, participate with your poured in energy, or like, wow, we're going to do this together. We're going to each of it, we're going to step up and play our instrument in the unique self symphony. And we're going to try and actually blow something open, right? But not in a kind of bombastic way. We're going to take seriously that this is important. Now, I know, right? And I apologize for it. It is a slightly insincere apology, but I do apologize. I know that took a bunch of time, but I just want to check with me, just in the chat box. Do you get why I wanted to do this again? Myra, welcome. Right? Did you get why? I just wanted to find us. Like, let's not. This is what we're doing here. This is what we're doing. That's what this is about. It's about that. It's that serious. It's that exciting. It's that compelling. It's that important, right? This is what we're here for, right? One Mountain views itself, experiences itself, not bombastically, not in this supercilious way, right? But in an insanely serious way, right? We're filled with joy. We're filled with celebration. We're filled with mad love. We're artists of the real. We're holy and broken hallelujahs. We're imperfect vessels for the light, for sure. We're making mistakes, but we are making mistakes in the right direction. We are making mistakes in the right direction, and we know that what we're doing here is important. And it's important not in an egoic overreach sense. It's actually really important. Actually, might be the most important overriding moral imperative, right, that a human being could participate in at this moment in time. Like, wow, like, oh my God, right? Like, oh my God, right? And we're afraid to say that, aren't we? It's like impolite. It's like impolite. And postmodern company are not allowed to say shit like that, right? You're not allowed to say stuff like that, but it's true. It's important. So what I want to do, with your permission, crazy privilege to be here. What I want to do, with your permission, right, is we're going to start this week, next week, and the week after, we're going to do a kind of Holy Trinity. Okay, so we're going to read the code. First, we're going to read a code, right? And Shahati's reading a code. And by the way, big news, everybody. Make your reservation. We are doing God, it's all right. Is it our 11th or 12th? It's 12th, Shahati, right? Our 12th mystery school, right? And the mystery schools are unimaginably important. Okay, so we're doing this unimaginably critical moment mystery school. And mystery schools formed the Renaissance, right? And the Renaissance was formed by these mystery schools that then reshaped, they told the new story. So a mystery school is a critical structure in culture, both West and East, and all vectors, right? All temporal vectors at all times, and all spatial vectors in all places. Mystery schools are critical. So at the very core of the center, right, this movement, right, is One Mountain and the mystery schools, and we're acting together. We're writing this new great library, this new 50-volume Da Vinci Time Between Worlds great library. And the mystery school is critically important. My dear friend Aubrey Marcus will be kind of flying over, right, to join with me. So my dear friend Aubrey Marcus is going to be joining us at the the mystery school, and we're going to cover a topic that we haven't talked about for 6 or 7 years in any real way, which is actually, we're going to actually talk about how we know truth in our bodies. We're going to do a very deep dive, right, into eros and sexuality, which we haven't done in kind of 7 or 8 years. It's insanely important, right? Because without a new story of eros and sexuality, right? But sexuality your sexuality might take place in your art, and it might take place in your, right? Sexuality is a very broad word, right? You can be, so we're going to talk about what that word means, right? What's the relationship between the sexual and the erotic? And by sexuality, I don't mean only kind of what classically is determined as sexuality. Sexuality is a much bigger, wider conversation. We're going to be talking about the 7 levels of eros, which is a critical, and the relationship between eros and existential risk. And we're going to try and just open up an entire new world. So the person that I started these mystery schools with was Shahat Kortan. We started them together with the Vinwowdy team, and we did a bunch of them. Right, and then Shahati, we sent Shahati. I'm joking when I said we sent, but Shahati went to Bali for a year, right, and kind of did a deep kind of meditative retreat in Bali. And Claire Molinaire took over the mystery schools, and then Shahati came back, right, and Shahati and Claire came together, and the 3 of us kind of held the mystery school. Then Krista stepped in at a key moment and just blew it away, and kind of created this fantastic and beautiful mystery school that we just did. Now for this year, right, Shati's stepping in to kind of pick it up and take it right the next level, right? So it's like, wow, right? It's like, huh, right? It's like, wow. So let's give a huge hand to Shahati, right? Yay. It's fantastic. It's crazy exciting. And that's going to allow Krista, together with Jacqueline and Jamie and Christina Amelon, right? Krista's, to actually focus on actually oral essays and kind of enacting the Great Library this year. And we're going to want to build one mountain in a kind of huge way. So it's like, so all the pieces will begin to, the Unique Self Institute with Claire, and Zach and I will be on David J. Temple, right? And it begins to happen. So wow, right? Wow. So Shati, give us a code. Give us this week's code.
Yes, I am most happy to resonate the code for you this week after this wonderful news, which I'm also super happy about. This week's code: value is real. Value can be distorted. Clarification of value is the great purpose, passion, and joy of life. Story is real. Story can be distorted. Clarification of story is the great purpose, passion, and joy of life. All stories are stories of value. Only a new story of value will protect the trillions of unborn lives and loves that will otherwise be lost to existential risk. So it really matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahati. Thank you. Who's also in her new home, which we're very excited about. Okay, so here's what we want to do. It's now, we have 13 minutes left, right? Which is not quite enough, but that's okay. So what I want to try and do is, we're going maybe 15 minutes over today, okay? But just to kind of get started, what I want to try and do is we're going to look at, and I want to thank Christina Amelon, who's been holding this project with me, right? It's I've been thinking about this for about, and I want to maybe give you the context and look today at just one clip. We're just going to look at one piece today. And we're going to look, the clip we're going to look at will be clip 1, Krista, with your permission. But I want to give you the context for what we're going to do, the next bunch of weeks, okay? So once in a while, you have a person who comes along who is an expression of the zeitgeist. In other words, they're not actually, they're not sharing new philosophy. And I don't mean that as a critique. They're not philosophers per se. They're not sharing a new set of ideas. They're not actually evolving the source code. And of course, most people don't evolve the source code. That's not a critique. That's totally fine. But what they do is they become a kind of mouthpiece. They kind of parrot, or mouthpiece is, maybe a nicer word. I don't mean parrot in a negative way, but they become a kind of uncontaminated reflection of what the zeitgeist is about. Does that make sense, everyone? Did you get what I mean? So a figure like that who's emerged over the last 15 years is a gentleman named Yuval Harari. Now, Yuval and I don't know each other. We have actually a bunch of I've discovered recently a bunch of mutual friends. A couple of people who are close to him are also either close to me or one person removed very close to me, right? So it's always great to have direct mutual friends. And my son actually took his course at Hebrew U and said he was completely lovely. And he probably watched my television show in the Middle East when I was in the Middle East, and kind of probably was aware of that, although I'm not sure. As some of I suffered a little bit of a tragedy in 2006, which there's an entire website about called "Who is Marc Gafni?" and that's really boring. But so I kind of stepped out of that arena into kind of a larger kind of world arena. I kind of stepped out of a particularly Hebrew wisdom Jewish arena into more of a meta-crisis world context. But you and I passed by each other, in many overlapping circles. And Yuval in the last, I don't know, I haven't tracked it closely, but whenever he published his first book, Sapiens, right, has emerged really as a kind of modern sage, actually, right? Which is exactly what's so problematic, right? In which Yuval is basically reflecting the late modern and postmodern zeitgeist unconsciously. He's an unconscious parrot of that zeitgeist, right? He brings together kind of a secularized Buddhism, right, together with a kind of reductive scientism, right, of an extreme form. And I want to really engage with you, Yuval, my friend, right, in the next 3 weeks or so. Now, I want to say, to begin with, I know there's an entire set of demonizing threads about Yuval online. There's a whole thread of Yuval being kind of an agent of, either the World Economic Forum, which is portrayed as per se evil, which I don't think the World Economic Forum is per se evil, although I think it's extremely problematic. But Yuval is kind of, depicted, and I understand why, but as a kind of an agent of forces, of empire, right? Yuval is identified with the legacy institutions of the world today, with Silicon Valley, and with kind of the classical legacy structures, right, of Western society. And in some sense, he is their myth bearer, right? Although he didn't create any of the myths, he was kind of raised on them. They're not his field of expertise. He's not a philosopher, as I said, but he's a very good popularizer. He's a pithy popularizer. And actually what happened is he was at Hebrew University. He has his specialty is a very, narrow discipline in terms of the art of warfare. I actually have his doctorate and I've read about half of it. It's actually great. And then, he came to the university and they said, hey, you got to first year, teach the general course, the world history course, which of course no one wants to teach in university because you don't get any credit for it. You can't really publish from it. But Yuval is by nature, more of a generalist, which is beautiful. I am too. And he gave the course and he kept doing research and he gave this very popular and beautiful and great course. And his husband, Yitzchak, said to him, let's publish these notes, and they did. And, first in Hebrew. And then it kind of got published in a bunch of languages, and then it got picked up by a publisher, and it became a kind of sensation. in the world. And then he published another book called Homo Deus and another book called 21 Questions. And he has a book out now called Nexus. And all of Yuval's work, I would say, if I could say it kind of very simply, very tenderly, right? And again, I'm going to say it carefully. I don't want to fault him for the work, right? He's expressing the classical assumptions of postmodernity. I think that his assumptions, right, the assumptions of postmodernity, as he articulates them, are the single most damaging, destructive, undermining causes of future human suffering at a level that the suffering caused by the religions that Yuval so readily mocks will become minuscule simply because of the new capacities. So I want to say that clearly. But all of that's not to demonize Yuval, because that's what happens on the web is he gets kind of demonized as this kind of, conspiratorial agent, for kind of world domination, who's operating in terrible bad faith. I don't believe Yuval's operating in bad faith. I don't know him in that sense, and I look forward to spending a bunch of hours with him, but my hours are not going to be to judge his faith, good or bad faith, right? Sartre's term, bad faith. But the issue is far more insidious if he's not operating in bad faith, meaning he believes it, right? And his beliefs, and again, not his, right? But Yuval is rather what Professor Chaim Soloveitchik, who's a great medievalist and was my teacher when I was 17 or 18, calls uncontaminated material. An uncontaminated material, what I mean by that is he's although he thinks himself non-naive, but he's actually a kind of, using the term in a literary sense, he's a naive representation, right, of a certain current of thought that he doesn't try in any way to hide, because he assumes that it's a given that it's true, so why would you hide it? And so it's disclosed, it's out in the open. And it's not by accident that Barack Obama says, wow, this is the great book, right? And Bill Gates says, wow, this is the big book, right? And Jeff Bezos, Amazon, this is the big book. And I could go on and list you 40 or 50, major formulators, right? Much more than influencers, right? But the actual key pivot figures who look to the book as like, yes, or to the set of books, because he's articulating, cogently what they're already thinking. Now, Yuval's dead wrong. He's dead wrong pretty much on every level, but he's also half right. That is to say, everything he says is exactly half right. And it represents actually a deep position that actually exists in the interior sciences. So he gets he'll make a point that's half right. But then the second half imbibes kind of the postmodern Kool-Aid and articulates sets of ideas that undermine the very ground that we walk on and are the seed, the sprouting, blooming seed. It's not a seed for 100 years in the future. Yuval is in conversation now. Yuval, and again, I'm using Yuval now, this next sentence, not specifically Yuval, but that particular class of kind of thinkers, popularizers, they're interfacing with all the leading echelons in the world today, and policy is being formed based on that. And the policy that's being formed, I believe, will lead to directly either the death of humanity or to the death of our humanity. Now, paradoxically, Yuval himself is aware of existential risk, but doesn't see any relationship between the postmodern discourse that he's articulating and existential risk. Now, I'm deeply aware this was all kind of abstract, what I just did. There was kind of an abstract thing I just did. So what I'm going to do is we're going to play, actually, I'm going to change my mind a little bit, Krista. We're going to play 3 pieces. Okay, it'll take about 6 or 7 minutes. Okay, I'm going to ask you if you can kind of like, right? Like stay in. And then I want to just kind of open up the space, and we'll pick up next week. But I want you to get a sense of the problematics first. Right? We just kind of listen deeply. And then we're going to kind of go in the chat box. I'm going to ask people to respond in the chat box, right? What's your reaction to these texts? Okay, then I'll begin. We'll start looking at them again next week. Okay, so here we go. So what I want to do is I want to start, actually, with your permission, Krista. Let's start actually with clip 1. We'll do clip 1, we'll do clip 2, and we'll do clip 3. We'll do those 3. Okay, everyone ready? Okay, so we're up for staying in. Okay, I know it's going to take another few minutes, but total appreciate it. And I want to just get started. Okay, so we're here to participate in the evolution of love, right? Are we ready? Are we ready, my friends? And by the way, if there was no meta crisis, as Elena reminds me often, we'd be doing the same thing, because we would need to live as full human beings, right? And be in our story of transformation, and be in our story of full realization, of full potency, and full joy, right? And full ethos and full eros. And we'd be doing the same set of studies, right? In order to live lives that were worthy and gorgeous and beautiful, and not deadened and empty and desiccated and broken. We would have to do that for our own personal and communal lives. So we'd be studying the same text, we'd be writing the same new story of value if there was no meta crisis. The only thing is that with a meta crisis, this is the last chance, right? At least within this iteration of the world story, within this dimension of reality. There are other dimensions of reality. That's a different conversation. There are other dimensions of reality. There's no question about that in my heart, mind, body. But within this dimension of reality, at this moment in history, this human story will either deepen and transform and bloom, and we will create, right, the most, good world that we can, the most true world we can, the most beautiful world that we can, and that we already know that those worlds live. We can feel them in our bodies. We yearn for them because we imagine them, and our imagination is real. Either we'll do that, or we will be lost in our myopic business as usual, narrow lives, each of us trying to work out our lives. Some of us doing new age transformations and another ayahuasca journey and another this and another that, don't bore me to death. And other people kind of, be kind of deep in their, kind of win-lose metrics, more public prism. But basically, everyone's going to be in their own very narrow circle. We won't become Homo Amore. We won't be able to have a critical mass of people that emerge, like happened in the beginning of modernity, where a critical mass of people went from egocentric consciousness, my nation, my people, everybody else gets killed, right? Critical mass of people went to world-centered consciousness. So we need now a critical mass of people to go from Homo sapien to Homo Amore. Right? Homo sapien to Homo Amore. Now, the description of Homo Amore is what we've been telling in One Mountain. And we're working on a set of 6, 7 books now. And Kirsten's done a beautiful work on it. And I've spent lots of time on it. And now Elena is crafting it with her artist's hand. And so we're going to be, what does it mean to become Homo Amore? And what does it mean to actually realize that value is real? Zohar, right? Right. So we're deep in this. But if we don't have a critical mass of people who become Homo Amore, and it doesn't become kind of part of the warp and woof, right? Part of the new source code of reality. If we don't evolve the source code itself, we will go down. And I'm quite sure of that. And what that looks like is a question. Okay? So it's a big deal. It's a big deal. So this is not kind of a dire warning, right? It's not like, right? No, and it kind of is. but it's not a, we said last year, we're not doomers. We actually have mad hope for the future, right? Hope's a member of the future. We're articulating here a member of the future. We're not deniers. We're not willing to deny things. We're not deniers. We're not doomers. We're not deniers. We're actually about the dawn of a new era. right, of a new story of human desire and human possibility and human potency. So that's what this is about. And Yuval is exactly telling the story that will be the story that sources our demise. That sources our demise. It can't not. Now, the reason, right? Right. I know that some of you are thinking, could he be quiet already? And can we see the clips? But you actually need this in order to get the clips. Okay. So the reason Yuval's telling the story is because he's rejecting, he's saying no to the old religions. That's actually an important no. There's a lot of legitimacy in that. But instead of the old religions, what he's doing is he's caricaturing the old religions in part correctly, but not fully. There's deeper strains in the old great wisdom traditions that need to be liberated and woven together. So he's caricaturing the old religions, but he's also caricaturing science, right? He's actually framing the old religions in their most shadowed, broken, destructive form, A. And then he's caricaturing science in its most exalted, noble, integrity form, right? So what he's doing is he's giving us the highest vision of science with the lowest vision of religion, and he's comparing them. Does everyone get that? Right? So that's, you've got two lines of development, two lines. One line is, let's say, religion. The other line is science. Does everyone get that? Two lines. And then what he's doing is a level line fallacy. So within each line, there's different levels. Does everyone get that? Within each line, let's say the line of religion, there's different levels of religion, right? There's kind of primitive religion, there's broken forms of religion, and there's more exalted, more noble, deeper religion, right? So there's different levels of religion. I could chart out each of the probably 7 levels of religion, which we're not going to do now. But there's different levels of religion, which roughly correspond to different structure stages of consciousness and developmental thought. Does that make sense? But there are also within science, which is another line, right? There are different levels of science. So you have kind of a certain kind of medieval science, which comes from a certain structure, which did information gathering in a particular way. And you have the beginning of modern science, right? And then you have, right, science as it moves into late modernity and post-modernity. And you have, and then within science, right, within science, you have different levels. You also have different levels of honesty and integrity, right? You have scientific studies that are honest and real. You have scientific studies that's just true, that are completely funded, right, by corrupt institutions that are seeking to commodify science for its ends. There's cherry picking that happens in scientific studies all the time. There's distortion of data that happens all the time. Anyone who lives in science knows that. And science in general is making this claim, right, to being kind of pristine objectivity, while religion is kind of darkened, medieval, regressive blackness. So that's kind of science's highest claim, and degrading religion to its lowest level. Now, religion has low levels and high levels, and science has low levels and high levels. But what Harari is doing is, I'll just sum up in a second, is he's doing a level line fallacy. So what he's doing is he's comparing two lines, and he's comparing the highest level of one line to the lowest level of the other. Did everyone get that now? He's comparing the highest level of one line to the lowest level of the other line. That's a level line fallacy. Does everyone get that? And no one gets it, right? So like, oh, we're comparing science and religion. No, you're lying, young man. Young man, what are you doing? You know better than that, Yuval. Don't do that, man. That's not okay. You can't do a level line fallacy. You can't caricature religion, right? So Yuval would say, if he was here now, I don't know what he would say, but he might say, he should say, well, what do you mean? Religion's caused all of this damage, right? Religion's like disaster. But look what it's done. It's caused all these terrible religious wars. It's like a horror. Okay, that's true. Religion has caused many, many religious wars, right? Whether they were caused by religion or religion was the kind of guise for a kind of ethnocentric nationalism is unclear. Did Genghis Khan kill 50 million people for religious reasons? or was the story of religion just the fig leaf for kind of what's called in Claire Graves' thought, kind of it's the red power drive structure of consciousness? Was it just a story for the structure of consciousness of this level, which Don Beck, Claire Graves' student, called, red? He gave it the color red in his spiral dynamics application of Claire Graves' thought. So was religion for Genghis Khan, right, but a fig leaf, or was it a motivational architecture, is an open question. That's a good question, right, around the board. But sometimes religion was not just a fig leaf, it was the motivational architecture. That's absolutely true. So Yuval will say, well, science has brought us all these good things, and religion's done this terrible thing. Well, let's just check out if that's true. I don't think that's true. If I got this right, let me just check out if this is right. All of the wars of the 20th century, for example, required the internal combustion engine. Anybody notice that? All the wars of the 20th century were fought on the platform of new technologies. We were not fighting with the muskets of the Civil War, my friend. The Civil War was a disaster and a horror in the United States. Or we certainly weren't fighting with the weaponry of the famous 30-year war some centuries ago in Europe. Or we weren't fighting with the weaponry of the opium wars, right, in China, all of which were horrors. No, but we were fighting with an entirely different level of weaponry. We were fighting with weaponry developed by a morally neutral modern science, or scientism. And all, right, of the wars of the 20th century are fought on the platform of an internal combustion engine. Let's start with that, right? Cars, Jeeps, right? And new kinds of weaponry of every kind, which ultimately climax in nuclear weaponry. And in 1945, when we remember the mushroom clouds well, right? And the level of death and destruction and mangled bodies and generations destroyed, right, by these modern technologies exponentially dwarfs all of the deaths in all the previous generations. That's just true. That's science. Let's just be clear of that, right? The level of suffering in the world today, right? The amount of people in the world is directly due to science, but you have actually objectively more suffering in the world, as I noted earlier. What does that mean? I mean, we're just getting started, right? So I'm not going to go down the road of science, but let's just say it's definitely not fair. It's definitely not fair to say, oh, religion did bad stuff and science is doing good stuff. That's ridiculous, right? And so what Yuval often will do is he'll do this level line fallacy: best of religion, right? Excuse me, best of science, worst of religion. Let's compare them. That happens a lot, but that's just one of the kind of fundamental fallacies in the way Yuval unpacks the world. But again, he is, and again, this is not about Yuval per se. So Yuval, brother, if you're watching, sweetness, big hug, but for real big hug, right? Not a kind of, new age silly gesture. A big hug, like total, and man, you are messing up, right? You're smarter than that, right? You got to get beyond the platitudes that you did when you were giving the lectures for 5 years, and that works at Hebrew U. By Vrit kacha ze oved. But actually, when you're speaking, right, to the world, right, and you're actually participating in forming the fabric of culture, you can't say a lot of things that you say, and not because they're true and shouldn't be said, but because they're wrong, and they're based on just sloppy and shoddy thinking, right, of just an unforgivable kind. And when I say unforgivable, again, I don't mean that in a harsh way. Like, I'm forgiven, you're forgiven, but hey, we got to do better, my friend. Okay, so I'm going to play just a couple of clips. I'm going to ask for some response, and we're going to close today. Okay, like, we ready? All right, give us clip one. Krista, take us inside.
Many, maybe most legal systems are based on this idea, this belief in human rights. But human rights are just like heaven and like God. It's just a fictional story that we've invented and spread around. It may be a very nice story. It may be a very attractive story. We want to believe it. But it's just a story. It's not a reality. It is not a biological reality. Just as jellyfish and woodpeckers and ostriches have no rights, Homo sapiens have no rights also. take a human, cut him open, look inside, you find their blood, and you find the heart and lungs and kidneys, but you don't find there any rights. The only place you find rights is in the fictional stories that humans have invented and spread around. And the same thing is also true in the political field. States and nations are also, like human rights and like God and like heaven, they too are just stories. A mountain is a reality. You can see it, you can touch it, you can even smell it. But Israel or the United States, they are just stories, very powerful stories, stories we might want to believe very much, but still they are just stories. You can't really see the United States. You cannot touch it. You cannot smell it.
So I want to ask everyone, just take some notes, right? Take some notes to yourself, right? But just kind of, this is at the very center. We're talking, telling a new story of value. We can't be in our own ivory tower. This is the very center of culture today. Okay, take it away. Clip 2.
If you ask what the meaning of life, what life is feeling things, having sensations, emotions, and reacting to them. Mm-hmm. When you feel something good, something pleasant, you want more out of it. You want more of it. When you feel something unpleasant, you want to get rid of it. That's the whole of life. That's what is happening all the time. You feel things, you want the pleasant things to increase, you want the unpleasant things to disappear. That's what life is. If you ask what is the meaning of life in a more kind of philosophical or spiritual question, the real question to ask, what kind of answer do you expect? Most people expect a story. And that's always the wrong answer. Most people expect that the answer to the question, what is the meaning of life, will be a story, like a big drama, that this is the plot line, and this is your role in the story, this is what you have to do, this is your line in the big play, you say your line, you do your thing, that's the thing. And this is human imagination, this is fantasy. To really understand life is not a story. The universe does not function like a story. So I think to really understand life, you need to observe it directly in a non-verbal way. Don't turn it into a story.
This is not a clip. This is a very short, just one paragraph from Yuval's book, Sapiens.
As far as we can tell, from a purely scientific viewpoint, human life has absolutely no meaning. Humans are the outcome of blind evolutionary processes that operate without goal or purpose. Our actions are not part of some divine cosmic plan, and if planet Earth were to blow up tomorrow morning, the universe would probably keep going about its business as usual. As far as we can tell at this point, human subjectivity would not be missed. Hence, any meaning that people ascribe to their lives is just a delusion.
Okay. My friends, I don't even know where to begin. Like, right? Like, oh my God. Right? Oh my God. But it's not enough, right, Krista, tenderly, my friend, to say disgusting, right? There is something repulsive, disgust. There's a literature of disgust, right? What does disgust mean? So there's but it's also, let's just notice something. Why is everybody buying it? Why is that compelling, right? Why is that compelling? In other words, why is this dude sold 20 million books, right? And it's not because, right? It's not because he's got this kind of, right, magnetic charisma. It's not that. It's not his well worked out body, right? Although he may have a great body. Yuval, I apologize, right? I'm Mr. kind of average dad body, so I don't got much going on here. So Yuval, I apologize. Don't mean to be kind of, just sorry about that, man. Right? But you get it, right? Like, hello, right? Hello. Like, what are you saying? Now, let's just do chat box and thank you everyone in the chat box, right? Right? Like, why is this, right? In other words, and in part, Danny's absolutely right, Rabbi Danny, because most of the versions of contemporary religion are infantile. but he's gone beyond that, brother, right? And he's talking about the nature of epistemology itself. He's saying basically, if we can really kind of get it, he's talking about, in the first clip, he's talking about the nature of the real. But the nature of the real. And he's kind of tried to gather, he's done his best. He was a wise, good reading generalist, right? And it's sad, right? He's trying to gather from every place in the world. And he basically says, okay, human rights are not real. Now, I just want to ask you guys a question. If you're Xi in China, or you're Putin, right? And your group around you is reading human rights are not real, from this kind of, Western historian, right? Huh. Wow. Like, wow. Like, wow. I mean, I just want you to begin to get this. You've got this Western historian kind of posing as a philosopher, and he's saying, I just want you to get what he's saying. He's saying human rights are not real, right? It's all just a story, right? It's all just a story. And I'm looking for a particular quote here. Hold on. Right? And he's setting it up as this is the scientific viewpoint. So let's just see if we can catch each one. One is it's about the nature of the real. Number one, nature of the real, right? It's nature of the real. So one. So he's talking about the nature of reality. Biological reality is real. Human rights are not real. That's a big claim. That's a very big claim to make. That claim is absurd, right? It is the sloppiest, most shoddy, bad thinking you can imagine. And yet, I just want to track this for a second. And Barack Obama saying, great book, everybody. Great book. This is awesome. Bill Gates, great book. I'm going to build my Gates Foundation based on this. Mark Zuckerberg, this is great. Huh? Like, wow. And I just want you to get it for a second. Just get it with me for a second, okay? Can we just get it together for a second? Can you imagine if 100 years ago, right, a writer writes a book that says human rights are a fiction, number one. Two, there's no meaning whatsoever to human life. Doesn't exist, right? I mean, to be clear, let me give you the exact quote. See if I can catch the exact quote, right? In other words, human subjectivity would not be missed, meaning love, human subjectivity, love, right? Love, commitment, loyalty, integrity, eros, poignancy, right? And all of that is essentially irrelevant. There's no meaning to it whatsoever. And if you think your love has any meaning at all, it's a delusion. That's a great thing to tell your kids, don't you think? So if you can't tell this to your kids, it's a lie. Anything that an educator can't share directly with children and have it bloom the lives of children is a lie. It's a big deal. We don't need to bloom the lives of children with propaganda. We bloom the lives of children with depth of truth. If you can't look at your children in the eye and say, me loving you is a lie, it's a delusion, and you living with integrity doesn't matter, and it won't be missed one way or the other, and it's irrelevant in the universe. If you can't look at your child and say that, then why are you saying it to the world? So it should be repeated to everyone. And then Yuval, my friend, Chaver sheli, right? And then you're running a bunch of children's books, which is what you're doing right now, right? So you're actually making an educational move. You can't make the claim, oh, I'm an ivory tower philosopher. I'm not the education guy. No, you're writing a series of children's books in which you're encoding this in children's books. What are you thinking, my friend? You want to save children from the blighted dogmas, right, of ignoble religion? Well, that's a good idea. I'm with you on that, man. But can you look at a child in the eye and tell them love is all a lie? And if you can't, why are you telling the world that? It's like, right? And then, right, and we're going to begin with this. I'm going to stop here, right? We're going to begin. Thank you for all the comments, and we're going to save the chat. And the comments are like wildly appreciated. But but it's not. And Talia, I totally got it. You just wrote about Hebrew U. but it's not a Hebrew University issue, right? It's not Hebrew U, right? And I would love to have a debate with him midday in open forum, right? But it's not a Hebrew University issue. Hebrew University is the Israeli reflection. Hebrew University, where Yuval teaches. So Talia, who lives in Israel, who works with us, just wrote, "Oh, this is the general position in all of Hebrew U." Yes, it is, right? That's exactly what I meant at the beginning of the talk today. He's reflecting. He's an unconscious parrot of the Zeitgeist at Hebrew University. That's a given at Hebrew U. But Hebrew University is just the Israeli subset, right, of this culture all over the world. This lives in China in its way. China is using Confucianism as a prop, right? But China's not really Confucianist, right? It actually is a fundamentally, right, reductive materialist view that holds that it's all contrived, right? And Putin, although he's using the great Russian past as a prop, but he's not actually going into the depth of the Russian soul, right? And emerging, right, out of that depth with a genuine field of meaning and value, right? He's a completely committed to a certain version of power and domination, and has a certain kind of national pride on which he's willing to lay everything down, and views that as his, right, as his, sense of the world, right? But however, this is not about how we're going to interpret Xi or Putin. We can talk about that, right? And Elena and I talked about it a little bit in the Ukraine book. That's not the point. The point is that this position is a universal position. That's the point. Okay, this position is a universal position. This is not Yuval's idea. This is the point I've been trying to make here, right? In other words, right? This is not Yuval's idea. This is Yuval reflecting, right, where the world is. Elena writes that Putin expresses Russia well, right, where Russia is today, which of course you can speak to more directly than I can, Dr. Elena. But I've been reading a lot, actually partially under your influence, about Russia and Russian literature these days. And yes, and China, but in Hebrew University and Western Europe. I mean, the reason Western Europe can't handle its own immigration issues, which are extremely complex, is it doesn't have any sense of its own self. I've been talking about that for, I don't know, 9-10 years, right? Without a sense of who I am and my kind of the field of value in which I live and which I represent. If I think that's all not real, then why would I ever create a standard that immigrants need to meet? But all of that brings us back to our core conversation. We're going to start here next week. We're going to hold here. We're going to start actually with these clips next week. And I want to ask you, if you can, let's create something in the world now the next 3 weeks, okay? We're going to, in some sense, we're going to press reset next week, right? I'll in a more organized way, in like 5 minutes, give kind of a recap of where we got to. We're going to look at these clips. We're going to look at 9 or 10 other clips, and let's actually go deep. And I want to say maybe one more thing, which we'll get to, more tomorrow. And I've been talking about this in different ways, for the last 15, 20 years, both with my dear friend and student and colleague, Zach, and with, 500 other people, right? And it's critical to understand that, right? Since 2015, I've focused a lot of energy and attention on this, right? Yuval says from a scientific point of view, and again, he sets up, not only is it at the highest version of science and the lowest version of religion, but actually, he's assuming that science's story is accurate. So I want to kind of get this. All the stories are not accurate. Which story is accurate? Science, because of course what he's claiming is that science is not telling a story, and science is just giving you facts. That's not true. That's a lie. It's just a lie. That's just not true, right? Science is on multiple levels telling a story. And the reason why science was effective was because science made things that worked, right? And so mathematical equations, right, put people on the moon. Oh, that works, must be true. Well, that tells you that the mathematical equations were saying something true, right? True in the sense that it was an accurate reflection of some dimension of reality. That's absolutely correct, okay? But stay with me for a second, friends, right? Stay with me, right? What science did was much more than that. Science didn't just work out kind of mathematical equations. what science did was then tell a story about the nature of reality and then deceptively hijack authority from the mathematical equations that worked in order to validate the story it was telling. So, for example, when science assumes that reality is only matter, that matter is the core of reality, and that, for example, consciousness is just a byproduct of matter, right? That is a story without question. That's a story. It's a made-up story. When science assumes, right, and what Yuval is doing is he's reflecting actually the mainstream dogmas of science. It's science. He views himself. He's saying, I'm the scientific viewpoint, and he says it in many other places. I'm expressing the scientific viewpoint. But his view of science is science says there's no free will, says Yuval, right? Science says human rights are not real. Science says human subjectivity, love itself, would not be missed in the cosmos. Whoa, he just said, whoa, that's a story. Science has nothing to say about that. That's actually a scientific story that's told by the scientific community. And so Yuval has the audacity to say all the other stories are not real, but this story that has no empirical validation to it, right? For example, that love, subjectivity, human love wouldn't be missed in the cosmos. No empirical validation for that whatsoever. Nonetheless, he says that story is true. And if you don't think that story is true, there's something wrong with you. That's the implication. Right? You're like benighted in some way. So he's actually penetrating reality with a made-up story, which is a dogmatic story that's claimed by science by hijacking authority from equations that work in order to make a storied claim about reality. And Yuval's saying that story is not to be debunked. That story is dogmatic. It can't be challenged. But all stories are not true. Right? Do you guys begin to get the level of just kind of unimaginable confusion? And it would, but it's not Yuval's confusion. Again, I want to be clear, friends, right? You know, we talked about this a little bit in this I of Value course yesterday. And Andrew, who's hosting the course from Parallax, Andrew said, is Yuval operating in bad faith? And I said, who cares? My issue is not Yuval. I would love to talk this out with Yuval and to have dinner and to have a deep dive conversation. I hope we will at some point. But this is not about Yuval. Yuval is, again, that's why I began the way we did. But I cited Soloveitchik, right, who talks about this kind of material is what he calls uncontaminated material. Yuval is a helpful window into the zeitgeist.